Today we're going to be building our very own app to help us track and remind us of assignments that are due. First, we want to create a brand new app script file and give it a unique name. Next, we're going to write our very first function. We'll replace the my function with the doGet function and use the HTML service that's built into Google Scripts to create an HTML output from a file. The file will be called index.html. When you create an HTML file, it comes with some pre-done code. I'm just going to use the paragraph tag in order to test and make sure that everything's working properly. The first time you deploy your app, you want to choose Web App and then make sure you've given it the proper permissions so that only you can access it. It can take a minute the first time. Now we know our code is deployed. For this layout, we're going to need 5 things. First, we're going to put a headline tag in, explaining what our app does. Then we're going to use 3 input fields, one for the subject, one for the due date, and one for a description of the assignment. Then we're going to have a button to submit it all. Feel free to copy and paste to save yourself time. Make sure to give each field a unique ID. You can learn lots more about HTML code and CSS styles at W3 Schools. We can use this site to create our very first style. Styles must always be put in the head tag of our code using the style tag. You may be starting to realize that creating styles one by one could be very time consuming. To get around this, we're going to use a pre-built group of styles called Material Bootstrap. Choose the latest version from the menu on the right hand side and make sure to copy the CSS files and put them in the header tag and copy the JavaScript links and put them in the body. Now we can access styles that are part of Material Bootstrap, like the input field designs. Choose whatever style you like best. I like this material input, so I'm going to copy this code. Paste the code wherever you want it to appear on your site. Make sure to update it with your own IDs and labels. It's important your input types be correct. So for your due date, make sure the type is a date. We can also go ahead and add a container style to this code to help with some of the spacing issues. Now we need a button. There are lots to choose from. I prefer this purple gradient. Make sure to give your button a unique ID. We're going to need that later. Now we're going to have to write some of our own JavaScript code to make sure that anything we put in those input fields gets transferred to be saved in a Google spreadsheet. Make sure all of your JavaScript is within a script tag. This first piece of code uses the getElementById function in order to grab the ID of our button, which is remind. Then we add an event listener, and when that button gets clicked, we're going to run a function called saveEntry. The saveEntry function basically has a variable called entryData, and we use again the document.getElementById to grab what's in our input fields. That's where we use the different IDs that we have. So our subject has the ID of subject, our due date has the ID of due, and our description has the ID of description. This function has created an array of values that we'll now be able to send to the back end of our app. In order to send that data to the back end, we need to call a Google script function. We're going to call that function userClicked, and then we're going to send our entryData variable through that function. Although we've called that userClick function from the front end, we now need to build that function in the back end in our code.js file. We now need to create a Google Sheet. Give it a name, and make sure to copy the link. You need to create variables for the URL of your spreadsheet, and then open that URL, and also create a variable for your worksheet. The worksheet is whatever the name is of the tab of the sheet that you're currently working on. In this case, it's Sheet 1. Using the append row function, we can add in our array of values from the front end. Make sure you separate them by a comma. Before we can deploy this function, we need to run it first and give it permission to use Google Sheets. This error is perfectly normal. We will now test our app to make sure it's saving data to our spreadsheet. And it is. We need to make one more change on our front end. When we click our Remind Me button, the values still stay stuck in the fields. So what we're going to do is just copy and paste those document.getElementByIds and just leave an empty string there. That way, after we press that saveEntry function, it's going to cancel out anything else that's in that field. Now that our app is saving data, we can pull that data back out and do some cool things with it. I'm creating a variable called LR that's going to pull the last row from the worksheet. This last row is going to be all the data from our most recent entry into our app. I'm also going to create variables for our current subject, current due date, and current description. Using the getRange function, I'm going to use the LR, which is the row, the last row, and I'm going to use the number of the column. So our subject column is in column number 1, our description is in column number 3, and our due date is in column number 2. Now that we can pull this information out of our spreadsheet, we can do cool things like send an email or create a calendar event. So first off, I'm going to use the Gmail app to send an email to myself. First, you have to put in the email address you want the email sent to, and then you put in the subject matter and a comma, and then what's going to be written in the body of your email. You can see what I'm doing here is using concatenation in order to put text around the values that are coming out of our spreadsheet. To learn more about concatenation, you can visit W3 Schools or do a quick Google search. I'm also going to use the Calendar app to create a calendar event on the due date of these assignments. You can see that this Create All Day Event function allows us to pass a title and a date through. I'm going to use concatenation to make sure that our current subject and description are used as the event title and our due date is used as the date. Before we are able to deploy this app, we need to run the user clicked function again and make sure that we allow all of the permissions. It's safe to allow these permissions because it's only your account that can access this information. Now we'll do one last test to make sure our information saves in our spreadsheet, sends us an email, and creates a calendar event. Here is the email. And here's the calendar event. Now that you've learned the basics, it's time to make something brilliant. Happy coding, everyone!